to take you through a brief journey and some insights into our Source to Sea project, case study on the Salt River neighbouring Nature's Valley, which aimed to create a stakeholder-driven platform that causes sustainable use of catchments, but also preserving the ecological integrity of them. And then some of these lessons that we've learned were implemented into a framework, which can then be put into similar neighbouring systems. I also want to just thank, so this project is supported by Whitley Fund for Nature, together with various partners, and my co-author, Professor Henry Coetzee, who presented his praxis model earlier. So let's see if this, come on, positivity. Yes, there we go. Okay, so introduction to Salt River as a Source to Sea project. So Source to Sea, I'm sure for many of us here, is not a new term. It's not a brand new approach, but it is a growing method of comprehensive management in terms of recognizing the interconnectedness between ecosystems from catchment to coast or source to sea, so across landscapes and seascapes. However, a lot of the research that I came across primarily lended itself to plastic pollution management, which is 100%, but what we wanted to try and do is create a source to sea approach that saw a full study of the system's health, so monitoring its ecological integrity, its economic and social aspects, together with upstream and downstream effects, which would include that plastic pollution. So choosing Salt River, this has been a decision that's been on the plate for a couple of years. It's a very understudied system, so research dated back to 2011, and that was specifically on macroinvertebrate studies because of someone wanting to introduce trout. So going off of that, we did some preliminary monitoring around 2019, and we discovered some freshwater fish species in the river, which might sound a bit weird, but considering this river is considered a fishless river, freshwater fishless. So to come across those little redfin minnow, it was a bit of a surprise for us, and we wanted to assess further what the status of the river is and how it will go forward. Oopsie. So our model that we kind of based it off of was the Stockholm Institute for Water Infrastructure. So it basically just shows your land, your freshwater, estuarine, coastal, and seascapes. So the scope of the project involved a 2-year multidisciplinary study from source to sea. So this map is just an overview of where we are situated. So let's see if this works. So Nature's Valley is around there. As it's been discussed, there's various MPAs in the area. So we are neighboring the Tsitsikamma MPA as well as the Robberg MPA. We fit within the Sand Parks, National Garden Route Park, as well as the Biosphere Reserve and an ecological, biological significant area. So there's a lot of formalized protection, but we wanted to understand the basic health to assess replicable study for neighboring systems which don't get that much research. So employing this source to sea approach, we try to emphasize that natural connectivity, so between up there where the top of the catchment is all the way down to the sea, assessing those impacts upstream and downstream. So bear with me with the model. Our plan was based on a nature-based solution model. So by Albert and his colleagues, we followed 6 various steps that ran through our original theory of change. So we wanted to codify the setting, understand the challenges, create visions and scenarios, assess potential impacts, develop solution strategies, and realize and monitor. So these 6 steps you'll see as we go along, they integrated throughout each activity, output, and the impacts that are in process. And throughout the project, there was various phases how they're all implemented. So from those steps that I just mentioned, these were our 4 main objectives. So that co-define the setting, we're trying to understand the challenges, create visions and scenarios, and then also realize and monitor. Throughout this entire process, it was a stakeholder-driven process, so ensuring everyone was involved that could be involved, not only just limited in the area, but everyone that utilizes and has impact or benefit from the system. So various activities took place. The initial one was forming that steering committee. So in-house, in NVT, we did an initial stakeholder analysis from which we formed a steering committee, which holds various groups from local community members, local NGOs, government, and so on. And from that, we initiated our first inaugural meeting and following workshops. And through that, we developed an NBS action plan, a nature-based solution action plan, whereafter we were able to assess various threats and drivers from those activities and studies, which has led us to create this model. So the first critical study that was done was the stakeholder analysis and social baseline. So the social baseline was conducted by Dr. Sandra Duplessis and her team, where various workshops were created with various groups and conservancies within the area to ensure everybody had a voice in this process. And yeah, so just ensuring all the different groups. This was the original model of who we would get involved, or the local stakeholders and NGOs and businesses that are affected or affect the area or that system. And then most important was this community empowerment, fostering ownership of the system. So not just limiting us as NGOs or localized practices to try and decide what to happen to the river, but incorporating their voice in the process. The second was ecological health. So this took a 2-part process, carbon baseline study to understand the ecosystems and catchment as a whole in terms of capturing carbon, as well as ecological health in terms of biodiversity. So water quality studies such as SAS, clarity, flow, nutrient levels, as well as other biodiversity studies such as vegetation and various species that utilize the system, so bird species particularly. And then from these, we derived threats and drivers of the system. So 3 primary threats were identified, namely invasive species. This involves alien species, as well as those introduction of native fish species. So although it seems like a weird one to have, because of those natural endemic macroinvertebrates that were originally found to be Gondwanaland relic macroinvertebrates, it does pose a threat to them and those that depend on it. Then on top of that is obviously human activity, so development, abstraction of water, illegal damming, and obviously runoff into the system. And then vulnerabilities, so the system is already a naturally low pH system. It makes it highly vulnerable to certain changes, particularly climate change and increased weather events, things like that. So this is just some of our team in action here between community-driven cleanups and the alien clearing, which has been, incredible. So those are some of the basic activities that have taken place, and then getting into the outputs that came from it. So that nature-based solution action plan that we put into place, understanding certain key challenges, as well as the creation of solution strategies and vision scenarios. So just to touch on some key challenges, I think the 2 that I want to highlight are the fragmented governments and also efficient communication. So I think that's been mentioned here a lot today is in terms of communication. So one of the things that we discovered is that it does get lost in translation, especially scientific talk, when you're dealing with various users of a system like a catchment. So it was just to ensure inclusivity in the process, ensuring understanding and the implementation of what results you've come up with, but also including them in the process of actually studying the system. So it's one thing that we try to do is involve the community members in mini-stats, for instance, just to give them a feel of what you're actually doing, so that they also have a feel of how things are being done and what the results are coming from that. And then fragmented governments. So it's more often than not, it separates work, so between your land, freshwater, estuarine, coastal, and marine systems. So it overlooks that connectivity, especially when it comes to the water source. So these were some of the outputs from our service providers. So Dr. Sandra Duplessis, she created a lovely social baseline study. Mike and Nick from the Roads Restoration Group, they created a carbon quantification mapping, and the baseline assessment through Wynand Vlok and his team. And then we went into our intervention phases. So I'll skip over because I think I'm running out of time, yeah. So we put in targeted intervention phases, the two of which were riparian vegetation restoration. So this is just an indication of what's happened so far. So this is the alien clearing that's happening along the entire catchment at the moment, primarily black wattle. And then in the upper catchment, we haven't got that result yet, but it is primarily blue gum that's been removed, and that will come to a conclusion soon. So we're already seeing some impacts or benefits from that, and that also goes back into the community. So we, again, for communication purposes, NVT has launched a journal. So this is in terms of transparency and feedback loops for local community members as well as local scientists, just to create that availability of knowledge, but also feedback into adaptive management if needed. So this is the big, broad model at the end of the day. It looks complex, but it's actually quite simple and also adaptable. So each step is important in terms of following a source to see process. And most importantly, throughout this process, it was stakeholder driven. So yeah, I just want to say thank you. And yeah, hope that everyone can consider using a model like this in your areas.